Hi, my name is Mattia Murray, and welcome to The Longer Road. You are on the longer road if you have multiple intersectional identities that are often marginalized. You've had to work harder to get to the starting line, and you might feel behind. I'm here to provide hope, support, and practical tips, and to let you know that you're not alone. Welcome to my guest, Danielle Kuntz. We met at a music online conference thing, and she is a harpist and especially works with new music, which is obviously amazing to me since I'm a composer. That's how we connected. And we've also since connected and learned that we have more things in common also. So I will let Danielle introduce herself.
Yeah, hi. So my name is Danielle. I call myself a new music harpist, and pretty much what I mean by that is I'm a musician that basically only plays contemporary music or music that's newly written. The fun thing about that is people think new music, they think, ooh, weird, crazy, modern type of stuff, but there's a huge variety in new music, and that's what's so cool about it. But I love being able to work with living composers, people, like Mattia, who are here with us, writing music, part of our culture. So that's what really excites me about what I do and new music. And there's a whole fun history with that, but we can get into that later.
Yeah, so my first question is always, what are you passionate about right now?
I think the basic thing I'm passionate about is, obviously contemporary music. The reason for that is I want to make sure that all people are able to get their voice heard. And, especially in the new music scene or the classical music scene, most of the music that we are playing is older music by, you know, dead people, dead white people, or just dead people in general, Beethoven and so on. But there's so much new music being written today that's incredible and innovative, exploratory, or just like working through the music that, emotions, culture, all of that. And I want to help that be heard. I want to get other musicians excited about performing new music by living composers and just help bring that to the forefront rather than, the old classical canon. But really the reason I'm passionate about that is because of how I was raised in a very conservative environment. We were very restricted on the music that we were allowed to listen to, learn, play, and so on. So I wasn't really exposed to contemporary music until college. Pretty much all the music that we played was pre 1940. Those of you who know Debussy, like, Claire de Lune, that was pushing the limits for us, which is really ridiculous to think about in hindsight. So that's just been really cool to me as I, met composers in school, met people who are creating music and exploring things, trying out new stuff. That's what really got me passionate about new music and also just helping people get their voices heard. So that's my overarching passion, but the way I specifically live that out is in the contemporary music scene.
That is really funny that Debussy was considered pushing the line.
It's
Uh,
so hilarious. They're just like, we think of Debussy as like super conservative classical music, but
right.
nope. There was some dissonance. Oh, the horror of that.
Yeah. And I'd be really curious to hear about. I know that one of the things you do is help make new music accessible to people. So part of that is literally playing it and bringing it to people, bringing it to audiences. I know that there's also often a part around that where there's a little, sometimes there's more explanation or story or sort of, presenting it in such a way that the audience is connecting to it. And I'm curious how you think about that when you're putting a program together or making a recording.
Yeah, so that all kind of ties back to what got me excited about contemporary music in the first place. And that was the people that I connected to in school were composers, music theorists, people who were, the ones creating the music. So it wasn't initially the music that I connected to, but it was the people behind the music. So as I work to bring new music to other new audiences, the thing I focus on is making that personal connection, whether that's between me and the audience or helping facilitate the connection between the composer and the audience. Just telling those stories and helping people see that vision behind the music. The music behind the music is what I sometimes say. So you can hear something and think, oh, that's weird, that's super unfamiliar. Why would anyone listen to it? Or you can come to it from the context with a little bit more information, like, oh, this piece is written about this circumstance or this painting or this emotion. And if you have that type of information, it helps you see the music a little bit differently, helps you connect to it. And if I want to help composers get their music out there, I also want to help the audiences appreciate the music by composers, if that makes sense. So just looking for ways to explore that personal connection. Genres outside of classical music do that pretty well. If we're talking about, pop music and so on, rap, things like that, where the focus really is on that, the personal story and what you're building through that. Classical music isn't as much, but it doesn't mean we can't include that element in the concert experience.
And I'm also really curious how you got into, like, what your experience was with getting into new music, because I know that a lot of people who grow up not listening to, I mean, honestly, just any type, but it's tautological, but you hear the type of music you hear, and people tend to like that. And they may find other things, but I feel like when they find a new, especially genre, something that they haven't really listened before and they really love it, it's because of the emotional connection and the story connection. And I'm really curious to hear how you got into modern classical music, not being raised with it.
Yeah, it was really just because that's what my friends did. They got me excited about it. Like, this is the coolest music ever. You should try out playing it. I'm like, okay. Friends who, were writing music are like, oh my gosh, you play harp. I want to write for you. I'm like, okay, write for me. And I'm like, oh, this is weird, but this is also really cool because my friend wrote it for me. I want to play it. And, as I dug into it, I was like, oh, this makes a lot more sense to me. And as the performer, if the music doesn't make sense to you, it's not going to make sense to the audience. You still have to embrace that first. I also had a really interesting experience in music history class. And that was one of the things that really helped me get open to contemporary music, realizing that a lot of what I was taught about, classical music composers in, my conservative homeschool circles was pretty fabricated. And, once I kind of was able to get past that filter, it really changed how I viewed music in general. And it wasn't, we have this perfect structure of music and then everyone was trying to rebel against that. It's more, oh, we tried something. Now we're going to try something else. Now we're going to try something else. And having more of like a neutral view of music exploration, I think helped a lot. And now it's just like, oh, this is cool, rather than that's weird. It's wrong. Why is someone doing it?
Yeah, that personal connection is really, really important. And it's just funny. I don't know why this even came up in my head, but while you were talking, I remember my mom saying, I was homeschooled also and also raised by, in a very much older music tradition. For the most part, my parents do not like modern music either. I remember my mom saying she was basically proud of herself for liking and listening to Tchaikovsky, even though he was gay.
It's so funny. I feel like we didn't even talk about that. We just thought Tchaikovsky because it was tonal. Therefore, all the stories that they told about Tchaikovsky must not have been true.
Oh my goodness.
Nuts. Totally nuts.
Yeah. But yeah, it is. I mean, again, I'm a composer. Obviously, I'm biased. But when we look back at the lives of composers whose music we hear a lot, so, anybody listening to this, the types of things that you've definitely heard, Mozart, Beethoven, they're in commercials, they're in movies, right? They're performed a lot if you go to a concert hall. These sort of great dead white men composers. Uh, we have these really interesting views of their lives, I feel like, where we look back and we're like, oh, they had these great difficulties and these great tragedies, and that's why they wrote such beautiful music. Or we have this like holistic picture of them, which we only have because they're dead and because their lives are being presented in a really particular way. And it is really different when you're interacting with a living musician in any genre because you're seeing their life in real time. And they may offer you some reasons that they wrote this piece, to kind of go back to the program notes or how you're presenting the piece, how you're telling that story, they may give you a version of the story that a historian might not say looking back, right? They're looking at the broad, oh, this is what happened in this 5-year span of time. But that's not how we experience our lives. We experience our lives in the moment, and we're creating art on a daily basis. So I think about that a lot, that like, someone might look back at my life, I don't know, in the future and say that, everything I'm working on right now is because of, this big life event that happened. I'm not thinking about that thing. I'm just making music, on a regular basis. And yeah, I think that in some ways that's almost a harder story to tell because I'm not thinking about my life in that way. So I'm not telling a big dramatic story about why I wrote this piece. It always just kind of feels like, oh well, yeah, I wrote it and here it is and you can listen to it if you want. It's not nearly as dramatic.
I think that almost makes it more relatable because
Mm.
also me as a performer, there's not a big dramatic thing that's coming up that's preparing me for performance. I practice, I play the concert, I talk to the audience. I think that just makes it a little bit more down to earth, relatable. And that's the really cool thing about music written by people around us. It's part of us. It's part of who we are. It's not, this thing in a museum that we epitomize, put on a pedestal.
Yeah. Well, and that's the pedestal thing is another funny thing to me because I also do other art that I'm not as good at. Right? I write poetry and I have been published and that's cool, but I have 2 degrees in composition. I feel very confident as a composer. I know that this is a thing I can do. Doesn't mean every piece I write is great, but like I have confidence that over the course of a lifetime I could write great work, right? And that feels very different to me than all of the other art forms I do more or less for fun. Again, like the personal experience being an artist, I don't think one ever feels like one is on the pedestal. I have that confidence in my ability as a composer, but I'm not, what I tell people is of the however much I've composed in my lifetime, I'm like really happy with about maybe 10 to 15 total minutes of it. And that's not all the same piece, right? I'm happy with like bits here and there. And there are some pieces that I would say really work, but you're always reaching. And I'd actually be interested to hear your perspective on that as a performer, because I know that certainly the classical performance perspective is begin with perfection and then, try to
Make it even more perfect.
make something then expressive and beautiful out of that. And I feel like if I approached writing that way, I would never finish anything.
I would never perform if everything had to be perfect and then even more perfect. And that
Hmm.
honestly might be why I went more into contemporary music, is because I'm not the person that has a note perfect performance. I never have been. I probably never will be. With contemporary music, there's a little bit more of a you're creating as you perform mentality. If you're the first person to perform something, the audience isn't going to know if you make up half of it in the middle. The composer will, but it's the first performance. That's where you're still really exploring a lot of it. So this whole mentality of it has to be perfect before you do it, I think that's also really intimidating to us as performers if we're playing something that has already been perfected. It's been published. It's, well, not just published, but it's been performed for decades, recorded by the best people in the world. Nothing that we can do can be even come close to that. So like, a Beethoven sonata, it's been performed so many times. Like, no matter how good I play it, there's going to be someone out there who has played it better. So for approaching it with that perspective of perfection, it's like, why bother? Whereas with the contemporary music, you're part of that creation process. And that's what makes it so exciting and lowers that barrier also, I think, as a performer as well. Because we're still creating it. The other thing I was thinking, my brain just goes like 100 different directions at once, which is super fun. The music that we think is super polished and perfect only was because of how much it's been refined over decades of being performed. Like there's rewrites to, especially for harp, there's rewrites to a lot of the major works. There were typos that people didn't figure out until decades later, things like that. So the stuff that we think of as perfect, it isn't actually perfect. We think it is because of how much it's been played. So the whole emphasis on perfection, I think, is frustrating as an artist. And I think the whole music industry puts too much emphasis on that rather than creating music, making music, connecting with people, just bringing that, art to people's lives.
Yeah, definitely. I'm also really curious to hear because it sounds like you have growth mindset now. And just to quickly say what that is, growth mindset is the idea that you can learn something and get better at things. And then fixed mindset is you have or do not have intrinsic talent and there's nothing else you can do about it. I think when we were kids, fixed mindset was pretty common. It was like you are or are not intelligent, you are or are not talented. And that was certainly, even though my parents wanted me to practice and get better, I still was very much fed the fixed mindset of talent and all that. And I'd be very curious to hear if that's what you were raised with as well. And if not, kind of how you got to be where you are.
I would say I feel like I was. My teachers tried to convey no, it's about practice, hard work. But people look at us as musicians and they think, oh, you're so good. Like you must have so much talent.
Hmm.
It really just is the time spent. And, people spend that time, whether it's doing music, doing art, learning math, any different thing. It's just, you spend the time, you get better at it. But there probably is some, I wouldn't say natural talent, but disposition toward different things. But I don't want to call that talent. So I guess overall, growth mindset is something I have been trying to think about, like not even just with music, but just in, life in general. Going from I can't get up early to maybe I can get up early, or it doesn't have to be 5 a.m. It could be 7:30 and that's still earlier. So just like in general in life, that is something I've been thinking about a lot lately and trying to, change how I think about things with not being, right, wrong, good, bad. But we can always improve. It's not terrible where we're at right now though.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that as well. Like what you just said, that, we can have an eye toward improving or changing without saying that this is bad where we are right now. And I do think that's how a lot of people experience their problems, is that it is awful. It must be fixed as soon as possible. And then of course the tension implied behind that turns out does not help make make one feel motivated toward change. Yeah, I actually, are there any other areas of your life that you want to talk about? I know we're talking about music, but we're talking about this, trying to think about growth mindset and letting things change. I know you have a lot going on in your life as well, and like being a parent, and there's all these other places where this shows up. If there's any other related things you want to touch on.
Yeah, I mean, there's like 100 different directions we could go. I think, yeah, I'm just trying to, as someone who was brought up very, conservatively, just figure out how to adapt and live my life maybe more neutrally is the best way I can think of. And that's what I've really appreciated about your podcast, especially is seeing things a little bit more of like a spectrum rather than, the rigid binary type of thing. Yeah, I know we had talked about a lot of different, angles, homeschooling and all of that sort of stuff, music, religion, all of like it affects so many areas of life. Very roundabout answer.
Mhm. Yeah, and then one of the other things that we were talking about with homeschooling in particular, if you want to jump into this topic at all, is how I certainly had overall a pretty negative experience with homeschooling. Meaning, when people ask me, do you think homeschooling is a good thing? I can't just say yes, right? I don't I don't think homeschooling is just, unquestionably good, right? I had a pretty negative experience in certain ways. And at the same time, during the pandemic, a lot of parents were homeschooling not by choice for a while and had that experience that they maybe were never expecting to have and, weren't planning to have. And I certainly heard a lot of friends concerned that they weren't doing a good job with that, part of it, because they were like, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't want to do this. And now, I'm in this position of homeschooling basically, or, being a significant part of the learning experience. And I do want to say to that, to anybody who was feeling that, that I know from experience, you can actually miss out on quite a bit of school and be okay. My parents were extremely negligent. And, that's not to say that that's great, but I guarantee you that whatever you were doing during the pandemic is better than a lot of the schooling I received. And I did turn out okay. So, when there are these big interruptions to learning, it can end up being okay. And the emotional support that you're providing for your kids around that is really the most important thing. More than any individual learning, if they had a learning interruption or a difficulty being at home, that the emotional support that you're giving them to say, hey, this is a weird situation. We're going to focus more on your, emotional wellness this year. And it's okay if school feels hard. That's what I'm seeing parents give their kids during the pandemic. And that's beautiful.
That's so well said. No, absolutely. Just because even, you know, developing like learning strategies, even if you're not learning the actual thing, is huge. And that's really what I spent the first 2 years of college trying to figure out how to do. Because also, I didn't have a great homeschool experience. I feel like I made up most of my college transcript, but we took the SAT, so it was all fine because yay, Texas. But yeah, there's such a wide spectrum of what, homeschooling, whether you're, building your whole curriculum a la carte, or you're, getting a curriculum from elsewhere, or online public school. There's so many options with homeschool. So that's something I've really tried to think through myself, is being open to the fact that other people didn't have bad homeschool experiences, even though it's tough for me to wrap my head around. But there were so many other factors in my life beyond just homeschooling that I can see, okay, if someone didn't have those other factors, they could have very well had a good homeschool experience. And I know people who have, but it does create, something I'm trying to work through, thinking about my own kid who's 2.5. So we still have a little bit of time there. Okay, but what am I going to do? Because not only did I not have a good experience homeschooling, I was also raised with a lot of fear around public school. And that doesn't go away. Even though I can rationalize that, there's still, that fear that was built, developed, curated, cultivated, whatever the right word is, fear of public school. So thinking
Yeah.
of, okay, how do I, grapple with that versus homeschooling? So just, I don't know. I'm rambling a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely had that as well. The parents who were intentionally instilling a fear of public schools and telling us how lucky we were that we didn't have to have that experience. And even though I'm sure I would have had some difficulties in public school, honestly, probably quite a few as a, undiagnosed neurodivergent kid, as my parents did. Both my parents are neurodivergent and had a lot of trouble in school. So I know that that's a real thing. And at the same time, I think that all parents experience a lot of fear for their kids. I'm not a parent, but I heavily raised my younger siblings, and I remember that just like fear of,
Mm-hmm.
are they going to be okay? Or, oh my God, they're, too quiet. What's going on right in the moment? And then the broader, are they going to be okay in their life? And I I don't know if I'm going to say this the way it is in my head, but like the fear is always going to be there and there is no perfect choice. We're not you cannot create a perfect life for a kid because the world has a lot of problems. And, a sensitive, creative, interesting kid is probably going to have problems in school, right? Bullying is a real problem. I know a lot of people who have actual PTSD from bullying. I think it's honestly not talked about enough that
Mm-hmm.
that's like a real trauma people can have. And at the same time, you can be bullied at home too. It's not like not going out in the world protects you from everything. So, yeah, I guess
I learned that the hard way.
yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, it's having that, the emotional support, I think, of those steady adult figures that you can come back to. And when you have that at home, you can actually have some pretty negative experiences at school and not develop trauma from it. if when you're coming home, you're really hearing like, oh, that's not okay. You shouldn't be experiencing that. You feel like you have support. You feel like you have someone to talk to. So, yeah, kids really are resilient as long as they have those stable adult figures.
Right. And the other thing I think through is I don't want to assume that my way is completely the only right way. So, for my child, I also want her to have other stable adult figures in her life,
Yeah, exactly.
just, other influences besides me, because no matter how hard I try, my trauma affects, my behavior and how I act, how I talk. And I don't want to pass that on to her. I want her to have, some other balance. Plus the odds that all of her teachers and all of her classes, the hundreds of people she'll encounter throughout school will all be terrible is pretty low. I think there's going to be benefits from that as well. Plus, not every family has a good home life, and having those outside support systems can be so important. And I wish I had that as a kid.
Yeah. And we as adults love having breaks from people. Like when it's, when when you go to the absence make the heart grow fonder type thing, you go away, you come back and you're like, "Oh, right, that's why I like you." Uh I wonder if that happens for kids too. I didn't really experience that much as a kid, so I don't know because I was just close with the same people for
Hmm.
a really long time. But I expect that kids learn something or get something out of that experience as well. The like starting to have a little bit of distance and then coming back and starting to titrate that as they, become full people and go out to live their own life.
Plus, parents need that too as well.
Yes.
But yeah, like the whole, raising a child. Of course, again, my child is 2.5, so we still have a long ways to go. But I really want to approach it with more of helping her develop autonomy, not trying to drill her into be perfect so that she never, diverges from that as an adult. I want her to, just be passing off more and more responsibility. Maybe responsibility isn't the right word because that's not, passing off burden to her. It's allowing her to take control of, her life and, little ways, even as a, 2-year old, I try to pass on, okay, you can eat what you want off your plate. I'm going to put it on the table in front of you, but you can pick what it is you do and don't want to eat right now. As a 6-month-old, that wasn't really her choice quite in the same way. But, and as a 4-year-old, she will probably pick out her own food. So it won't even be me putting it in front of the table. So that's kind of how I try to approach parenting, is just, it's a gradual passing off of responsibility, autonomy. There's a better word out there that I can't think of right now, but
Yeah, I love the word autonomy. And I think it's something that everyone needs and craves, but that sometimes we ignore unless our brain is demanding it in some way. And kids are just so open about that. As soon as they start, as 2-year-old, when they start really exploring what autonomy is for them, it's a really powerful experience. And I feel like kids are really good at just expressing that and being like, nope, I want to do it this way.
mm-hmm.
And it's really, as long as we nurture that and allow them to have that, they can actually really hang on to that to a large degree. And, crushing that a lot, I think, is one thing that leads to people pleasing behavior.
Yes. Yeah. It's really sad. Like, I've been kind of going through a lot of grief myself, looking back on, how I'm raising my daughter with my own childhood and seeing how a lot of that, search for autonomy was viewed as acting out or bad behavior and
Yeah.
punished rather than, encouraged, given space. So it's been a challenge. It's like, it's both beautiful and also a little gut wrenching in the same way. But again, that's why I want my daughter to have other influences, because I need to give myself space to be able to, grieve and heal, grow myself, as well. Because I want to be there for her when she's, 40, if she wants me around,
Hmm.
instead of, destroying the relationship by trying to take away that autonomy right now.
Yeah. That is such a beautiful approach. And I see my friends who are good parents and I see what they're doing and, how they're expressing it, which you obviously are, and seeing how even if your kid has a really hard time or is going through, a big experience at some point in their life, you're doing your own work ahead of time, right? So you're continuing to grow and heal and deal with this grief, which I think just comes up when you have kids, right? It's like you can
Mhm.
do all the personal work in the world, and then you have a kid and you're like, ah, shit, here's some
There's
more
all this stuff I
layers.
did not even realize was there.
Exactly. And knowing that you're kind of continuing to pave the way by doing your own work, even if, your kid ends up wanting space, which they do, right? Because that's part of autonomy is that they want to go, learn and do things on their own and not just follow how you healed and your path. And they'll know that you're a safe person to come back to
Mhm.
no matter what, because you're already creating that space ahead of time.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Still figuring it out. We'll see if I'm saying the same thing in 5 years.
Right.
I hope so. I hope so. But I'm not speaking from depths of experience or anything. Very much speaking of where I am right now, which
Yeah.
is in the trenches with a toddler. It's great.
Yeah. So one thing you said that I jotted down was living more neutrally.
Hmm.
And I'm really curious how that shows up for you, assuming, and this is me making an assumption that's probably correct, that you are exhausted because you have a 2-year-old.
You're not wrong.
So how do you return to that neutrality, when your actual physical system is kind of at its limits?
That's a really good question. Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, just over the whole broad spectrum of life. But at practical level, just thinking, I'm tired. That's okay. I'm gonna have an extra coffee today. That's okay. And not, attributing, good, bad, values to decisions, thinking through, context is important. Context is key. The decision I'm making right now might not be decisions I make 2 years from now because the context is all going to be different. So yeah, that's something I'm really trying to think through, just being neutral about everything. And also, the way I'm approaching other people, being a little bit more neutral, because especially growing up in such a judgmental environment, that's something I still have to fight against. I try not to guilt myself over it because, yeah, it's obvious, from my background that there's still going to be some remnants of that, in my, subconscious thinking. But trying to find that balance between, awareness without guilting myself, but, just being neutral in my approaches with other people, even trying to go beyond, understanding where they're coming from, but seeing, okay, their decision might not be what I would choose. That doesn't mean it's a bad decision for them. It just means in their life context, that's what they chose. And that's great. And it doesn't have to be what I would choose because that's not my life context either. So I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
I'm
definitely.
also tired today, if you can't tell.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that your total answer was basically about it's not neutrality. I think, okay, I'm going to take a step back. I think a lot of times when people want to get to neutrality, secretly they want to feel really, really good. And they think that neutrality is going to feel really, really good because it is going to feel the opposite of bad, which is how they feel right now. Right.
Mhm.
So, and maybe neutrality isn't what they'd be seeking, but, people will sometimes choose a sort of nice, culturally validated term, whatever's popular right now. And they're like, that's what I want. But secretly what they're hoping is it's actually going to be amazing, even if they're saying, neutral or something sort of, oh, I just want to have just enough, anyway. I i laugh at this because I see it in myself as well, and I love that what you're saying about neutrality is really about accepting what's happening and accepting where you're at and the context of your life right now, which I do believe is true neutrality. You're not like, okay, I'm going to accept this person's decision and then I'm going to feel really super awesome about it, right? It's just like, that's okay. And I think that that's okay. That amount of neutrality is what can really get a lot of people through a hard day.
Yeah.
You don't have to feel awesome about it. Getting to actual neutral is a big relief over, the potential guilt or shame or whatever we were raised with or culturally told we should feel about our decisions.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Anything else about neutrality that you want to share?
Yeah, and I think, maybe tying it back to what I talked about in the beginning is, giving people, trying to give other people a voice, as well.
Mm,
A lot of that comes down to, I want to help them validate their perspective. Their point of view might be a more accurate term. And that comes down to, my point of view is not the same as someone else's point of view, is not the same as, someone else's point of view. We all have these different, unique perspectives shaped by our circumstances, where we live, all of these factors. And honestly, probably the only way to actually know right, I'm putting that in air quotes, is by being able to see this whole cumulation of perspectives. And we'll never get there because we can't get inside absolutely everyone's heads. But the more perspectives we can see, just by being part of other people's lives, listening to them, being neutral toward their point of view. I don't know if that's a good application, but, helping people, you feel some validity in their perspectives. That's what I really believe is important, because, what's important to me, I'm, thinking more of like, practical needs type of thing, might not be important to someone else. What's not important to me might be excruciatingly important to someone else. And I don't want to dismiss any of that. So listening, helping validate what other people think. I don't think any of those are complete sentences, but that's okay.
I was giggling because this is a conversation I've had with my partner repeatedly. My partner's also, who I live with, is also on the spectrum. And there have been a couple times where they've basically just been like, can you just validate that what I'm saying makes sense? And I'm like, well, it doesn't make sense to me. That's why I'm asking about it. I don't want to lie and say that it makes sense to me. But I also get this. I think what you're saying is the only thing that works to eventually change people's minds. If there is something where you actually want to, affect someone else's belief, if you're not validating their point of view first, they're not listening, right? And you've
Mhm.
had this experience, I'm sure, on the receiving end, when someone's just totally dismissive of, where you're coming from, who you are, the context that informed your decision, and they're just, trying to shove a point of view down your throat without listening to you first. Nobody likes that. And I certainly think about this both in the general conservative mindset we grew up in. Not that I'm trying to change a lot of minds there right now. I'm putting my energy elsewhere for the most part, but also in music and art and how people look for and consume and enjoy art. I think there's a lot of shaming of people's tastes, and people often feel the need to justify, oh, this TV show is really good, that's why I'm watching it. And it's like, I don't care. That TV show could
Or
be
this show
crap.
is so terrible. I can't believe I'm watching it.
Right. And that's actually one of the things I always want to validate as an artist is people's tastes and what you like and what entertains you. That's informed by the context of everything you've experienced up until this point. There's nothing wrong with you if you don't like the big fancy classical piece. And there's nothing wrong with you if you do like the, weird noise, band that like literally just makes noise and that's what they do, right? There's such a wide range of experiences available. And it's just that's just a message I like to put out there as much as possible. Is I want people to trust and love their own taste in what they're looking for in art, because you're not wrong. Like whatever you like, you are correct. You like it.
Mhm.
That is true.
That's taken so long for me to figure out. Just as
Hmm.
someone, growing up told, this is the music you should like, this is the music you should not like. And, having this objective, good, bad music mentality, coming to more of a neutral place in music, both for myself and for other people. And I think that's why I love contemporary music, or like modern new music, so much. There's such a huge variety in it. Like there's people writing very traditional music. There's people writing, like, we're playing on a saw and a fish line and some cowbells kind
Yep.
of music, and everything in between. Like, no matter what type of music you like, there's someone out there writing music that you will love. You don't have to like all the other stuff out there. It's okay. And in all honesty, it probably means more to the composers to have, a small cluster of people who love, love their music and are there as their
Yes.
super fans, cheering them on, liking all their social media posts, buying all their albums, versus all these people who are just listening to it because they have to. I don't want to guilt the people who are, listening because they have to. I want to encourage them to find something else. It's okay if my music is not for them. There's some music out there, but you can still find music you like and support living composers. That's the hill I will die on right now.
Yay.
And I lost my other train of thought with where I was going on that. I'll remember it when we're done.
Yeah. So I would like to wrap up, and I'm going to ask where people can find you, and then also if you have any advice for your younger self at any age. And you can say just what that age is and what the advice is.
It's a good question. So the easier answer, where people can find me, you can find me on my website, daniellekuntz.com, KUNTZ.com, or Instagram is probably where I'm the most active, Danielle Kuntz Harp, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, a little bit of TikTok when I have the time and interest. As far as advice to my younger self, I think what I would say to myself as a teenager especially is probably two things. One, there's not one correct answer. There's a multitude of good answers or good solutions, or solutions that will work even if they don't look exactly the same. The result doesn't look exactly the same. Second thing is, no one person has all the answers, whether that's your parents or your church leader or a mentor. No one person has all the answers, but if you surround yourself with, a multitude of people with a multitude of perspectives, that can help you get more perspective to figure out what makes most sense for you. And I wish I had known that as, 17, 18, 19-year-old or earlier, honestly, but I needed that then.
Yeah, I love that a lot. And that has also been a big growth point for me as well. Thank you so much for being here. We will put all of those links in the show notes so people can find them easily. And we will talk to you next week. Thank you. Thanks for listening. If you know someone who would be helped by this podcast, please share it with them. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions at mattia@mattiamurray.com. That's MATTIA at MATTIAMAUREE.com. Thank you.